Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
Welcome back to another edition of Real Answers with Christopher Anderson. Wednesdays during the Noon Report, we tackle the tough topics facing today's families with licensed mental health counselor Christopher Anderson. And Chris, the numbers tell a sad story about the impact that mandatory online learning had on those students who were required to stay home the longest. What can parents do to help rectify this?
One thing is to remember that your school has resources to help. Speak directly with your teachers and or your school administrators about any resources that they may have on hand to help in the situation. But at home, remember too that you, as parents, can help your child get caught back up. Some of the school's resources may include take-home activities or books that you can do with your child. For example, turn those screens off. Set a family reading hour a couple of times per week, or even the parents engage in reading or learning activities to help encourage the students to get excited about learning as well. And then after that hour or however long you determine to turn those screens off, have an evening snack or do something else that's fun to help encourage bonding with your children and encourage them to, again, maintain some healthy interactions. I would advise against turning the screens back on at this point. Keep it a family-centered activity. Another thing that we all need to remember is our attitude. We've talked here on Real Answers about resilience, about how our attitudes and approaches to life's challenges really make a difference in the outcomes. And if only we had more school systems that actually taught more directly about resilience, encouraging students to not be victims, I think that would help them to navigate through these types of challenges or just tough times with strong attitudes and grace. I think would be in far better shape on so many levels in this nation. Are we going to have a victim mentality or just simply remember that God doesn't promise us easy street living all the time? We are adaptable, and we need to remember that challenges can either sharpen us and make us stronger, or we just simply become victims and find somebody to blame. Parents, you need to learn about resilience yourself and how you can help your children become more resilient. This is one of those lessons, Brandon, that the schools aren't necessarily going to teach, and it needs to come from parents and even grandparents, those older and wiser generations. I mean, this is how God wanted learning and wisdom to be passed down. For older students, this may mean having direct conversations with them to help them avoid becoming frustrated that they may be a little bit behind in certain things or not performing as well as they may have before. For younger students, it may mean just being careful about speaking too much and in too much detail and showing excessive emotions as parents about your own frustrations with this whole COVID pandemic and the politicization of this as well. So small children, they're emotional sponges, and they will start to exhibit our own emotional patterns, both by mimicking us as parents, but also an actual experience, meaning they will be feeling those emotions. So take responsibility and lead your own household and fill in some of those gaps by helping to set some healthy activities for learning and other things in the evenings, weekends, and of course that all-important summer break.
And Chris, with respect to avoiding the blame game, we probably need to be on our guard against finding political targets.
Oh, absolutely. We talked earlier this year, or maybe late last year, where we had taken account of our responses to the pandemic and what we need to do to help recover and possibly prepare for another outbreak. When this pandemic started, everybody, except for a few scientists in a hidden laboratory in China somewhere, were caught off guard, completely unaware of what was about to happen and unfold in the world. It didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat. All of us were wondering what on earth is going on and how do we get through it. And then, of course, we watched the responses to the pandemic unfold, and it quickly became very political and very polarizing, and like just about every other issue out there seems to be. But again, if we choose to pin blame right now on a personal level, and what I mean by personal level is in our daily conversations with our friends and our family who may fall on the opposite side of the political aisle, what will that do? What impact is that going to have? And I'll tell you, it's only going to harm our relationships with those people and harm our witnesses for Christ. So if you want to do something about the wrongs in this whole situation, then go ahead, join forces appropriately with the various organizations out there that are trying to advocate for truth to help ensure the government and other agencies don't overstep their boundaries.
You've been listening to another edition of Real Answers with Christopher Anderson. It airs Wednesdays during the Noon Report. We tackle the tough topics facing today's families with Christian counselor Christopher Anderson.